Perfect. And I'll just briefly introduce our final speaker for this session is Professor Cynthia Giannacavo. I hope I've got that reasonably correct, Cynthia. Cynthia is chair of Horticulture Cooperative Studies and Sustainable Development at the University of Almeria in Spain. And just a reminder again, to use the chat function because we will have a general Q&A at the end of Cynthia's presentation. Over to you, Cynthia.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk sort of on another level today. We've heard from various levels. And I'm approaching this very much from working with a particular sector, an agricultural system. So the chair that I hold at the university acts as a bridge between the academic part, the research part, and agricultural horticultural sector. Almeria One, which is its own sort of local production system. It's supported by the organization of Association of Producer Organizations, which means about 80 cooperatives and 15,000 small family farmers. So our idea is to leverage research and innovation to help solve the sector challenges. Okay, so we're coming at a very bottom-up approach and saying, what are the research tools and resources available so that we can use that to solve these challenges? Okay. The University of Almeria is quite well known in intensive agriculture and related technologies. Now, this is an area that clearly has gone through a lot of transitions already. In the 1950s and 60s, it was the poorest place in Europe. And as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, very barren, very arid lands. Finally, there was some plan under Franco's government to bring water in. There was a system of very rudimentary greenhouses, a system where soil was improved by putting fertilizer and sand on top. And then eventually, with the introduction of plastics, greenhouses came about. It became a cooperative model, very much self-help. And now it's quite a sophisticated greenhouse system. It's not like the Dutch one. It relies on solar energy. It doesn't use heating, it doesn't use lighting, it uses the natural breeze, etc. But clearly we're in a dry area. And we rely very much on water, scarce water resources. There's been a lot of transitions to integrated pest management and that kind of thing. Every one of these little squares represents a small family farmer. So you can imagine the coordination challenges that we have there. And when we're thinking about it as an agricultural knowledge innovation system, you know, those knowledge flows are not as easy as if this was just one big corporate farm. Okay, so I put up some projects here, and it's not to brag or anything. We're extremely grateful that we have them. But what I put them up here is that basically these are the resources that we see that we have to help us do this transition and to meet these challenges. And you know, why do we have these? Well, it ties into something that comes from Laurent's article, and I think some others as well, which is about sort of co-producing the suite of technical, social, and institutional innovations that are necessary to co-shape this transformation. So it's about coordinating the innovation activities so that we're creating a coherent set of solutions as coupled innovations. So we've got, you know, digital, we've got IPM Works, we've got Nefertiti in the farm demo, and that deals in our case with water, nutrients, and IPM. We have digital tools for farm advisors, we have sustainable supply chains. We also have a lot of operating groups. Our cooperatives have been extremely active in both regional and national. We have an agroecology living lab, which has been the initiative of the Farmers Association. The university is helping, but was not our initiative, okay? Plus, we also have a digital innovation hub, which is not a public sector one. It is, well, the university's in, but it's private sector actors that are, some are not-for-profits, okay? So why don't we look at mission-oriented innovation policy? Some things stick out here. This idea about economic growth, and then the transition policy, which is very much about change, that's about benefits for society at large. Well, what does that mean? That means that values are at play. Now, in my sort of day job, I'm a business professor, right? I teach international finance, I teach management, I do these kinds of things. You know, and when we discuss value from an economic point of view or from a business point of view, we have a very different view than if we're discussing value from society's point of view, or if I'm dealing with someone who's a agroecologist or somebody who works with socio-ecological systems. And what I'm going to talk about today is precisely the interaction that we've had working with socio-ecological systems, our farmers, and a sort of a multi-disciplinary approach. What's important here too is to understand that we're dealing with different organizational value logics. So if you look up at the top right-hand corner, you can see, okay, well, we have our mission-related values. And, you know, we've got the logic of democracy, we've got the logic of the state. But then we have this sort of survival needs where we've got the logic of capitalism mixed with the logic of the state. And somehow we have to come up with a value proposition there. And when the value propositions are not homogeneous, as you can see in the left-hand corner, but you've got a heterogeneous sort of societal level institutional logics, we run into a lot of conflicts. So the questions are, what value is offered and to whom? What is valued? How is it valued? And buy-in for whom? Because our business models are embedded in these organizations and systems. Okay, so we're dealing with a variety of institutional logics. That brings us back to sustainability then. What is a sustainable business model? Now, we are very accustomed to see these three rings on the left-hand side. And what we do, what we have done, and I'll explain to what we're trying to do in Almeria, is we're shifting to what I have on the right-hand side, not the left-hand side, okay? So the left-hand side, we see these three rings, and we look for something that's common in the middle. But from our perspective in Almeria, we have decided that this is not sufficient. And it's not, I don't say we when I say an academic, okay? I'm talking about the process that we've gone through. So that we have come up understanding that we've got a paradigm shift here. And that the way that we govern the exchange of values often matters too. So governance matters, and we need innovation there. So this paradigm shift is a new sustainability framework, which our sector has decided that we need to work on. And it's recognizing the significance of the life support systems in the biosphere as a foundation for the economy, society, and human dimension. So that the economy is a subsystem of society, which is a subsystem of our environment or ecosystem. Okay, so this is kind of our mission here in red. Within this sustainability framework, the long-term sustainability of the greenhouse agriculture in Almeria depends on the ability of the agricultural model to transition to a new sustainable framework which builds upon this biosphere as a precondition for socio-economic development. Okay, that's a big mouthful there. However, it's extremely challenging, as you can imagine. I mean, imagine the challenge to any one of you who work closely in your agricultural sector. If you actually said that and said, okay, right, well, we've got a new model and you've got to recognize that your biosphere is your foundation. So we've got all kinds of complex realities because we're trying to balance cost, benefits, trade-offs, social, economic, environmental dimensions. But the trade-offs aren't that straightforward because we've got plural value dimensions. We're dealing with completely different ways of valuing. So it's a straightforward cost benefit is just not possible. So how do we deal with this, right? What's our method? So we're dealing with plural values. We're dealing with multi-criterias. We are dealing with multi-actors. And we're also dealing with transdisciplinary research. So we need to find common conceptual grounds in order to address the divergence of values in the analysis of this complex system. We have to deal with disagreements in the definitions or solutions to societal problems. We have to include multi-actors, and that's coupled with this idea of plural values and multiple criteria approach. Okay, and you know, this multi-actor approach, and I want to underline this, and I guess I'm speaking to the converted here probably today, but it's an adequate scientific response. And the reason I say it's underutilized is because we may use it in certain projects and that, but I don't think it's utilized enough to actually find solutions. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And this stimulates the cooperation of scientists with practitioners, industry, and other actors. And we've talked about the words co-learning, knowledge co-production processes, etc. Okay, so let's say that we had already taken up the mission-oriented agricultural knowledge, and I should have actually kept the K there, agricultural and innovation system challenge, in a workshop that we did, a very carefully planned workshop in 2019. And we put together a multi-actor community of practice. The results are published, so you're welcome to look at it, including scientists and non-scientists who had extensive experience in our agricultural system from 5 knowledge domains: technology, environment, society and culture, economy, and governance. The non-scientists included public and private actors, cooperative presidents, CEOs, public extension services, policymakers, foundations, farmers association, tech companies, etc. And we had very clear that we wanted to look at 3 collective dynamics: explore and define the sustainability challenges, identify opportunities and barriers to address these challenges, and then for me, this was really important because we often talk about missions and strategies, but we often don't get as far as implementation. And this is, you know, my thing as a management prof is that, you know, it's usually the one little chapter at the end of the book, but it's the most important chapter. How do you establish collective action to actually move from theory to practice? Okay. So one important thing to understand too is if we're dealing with plural values, somehow we need to come up with consensus. That is why the structuring of this workshop was very carefully done and very strictly followed. The rules of the game were that consensus had to be found around these 6 topics. There's one topic that was close and dear to my heart here that never made it in, but you know, I'm not allowed to impose that, which was, I think that there's a big issue with women not being included in enough in this, the role of women, but it didn't make the list. So you know, that's consensus, right? So we identified these 6 fundamental challenges to transitioning to an agricultural model that aims to ameliorate the risks and avoid, and this is really important for us, and it's not overstating it, avoiding a systemic collapse while balancing concern for profitability with sustainability. It's a big task, but this is what we came up with. So governance based on a culture of shared responsibility, sustainable and efficient use of water, biodiversity conservation, implementing a circular economy plan, technology and knowledge transfer, and image and identity. Who are we as a society? And how do people see us as an agricultural productive society? So we have outcomes of these challenges, not the article. I'll just give you one example of one of the missions, okay? So let's look at this. So the first one was the governance based on a culture of shared responsibility, okay? So what are we looking at there? We're looking at a shift to a new governance system that enables a culture of shared responsibility for long-term sustainability. We noticed something very important in our workshop is that the regulatory non-compliance tolerated by public, local, and regional administrations was a serious issue. We noticed that the role of civil society had been neglected in public policies and governance. We also recognized that the diversity of governance interpretations and meanings, which are dependent on plural values, it's a very complex task to define a common and generic governance strategy. So for each of these challenges, we identify the opportunities, barriers, and key actions. Okay, so we don't have time at all to go through anything, but let me just point out a few things to you. mostly looking at the key actions, because I think this ties into the point of my presentation, which was which tools and research initiatives are available to help us solve these issues. So one of the key actions was that the new governance model meant that we had to improve internal and interinstitutional coordination. We had to empower Almeri's society to actually participate in public policies. And we have to create new spaces for social learning and collective construction for sustainability, instead of doing this thing of trade-offs, where we're negotiating just individual interests and preferences. Okay, so that was an example of how we dealt with the governance. When we came to the water one, we identified various opportunities: low-cost technologies, integrated use of water, effective systems of knowledge exchange, certifications, including markets. And these are all things that we were able to tie into all of those projects that you saw before. All of the operating groups, we even had an operating group that came up with a certification. Okay, so this multi-actor approach, these projects which give people a focus and a forum in which to interact, allowed us to address a lot of these challenges. So at your leisure, you can go through what we've done for biodiversity conservation, the implementation of a circular economy plan. One thing here that was very important was the creation of a local APIS that facilitated these sustainability strategies amongst all the relevant actors, and also the support for existing research, development, innovation initiatives. EIP, agri operating groups, etc. were very good. So I'm going to jump over the technology and knowledge transfer, because that tied in very much to the digital projects and policies, and also image and identity. So what did we end up with in this workshop? Well, we had actions that we identified that people undertook to do. So we had solutions, strategies for social inclusion, regulatory compliance, territorial planning, agroecology, environmental goals and public policies, etc. We identified our opportunities and we identified our barriers. But I think that this showed that it was an example of a successful facilitation of the creation of a culture of shared missions and responsibility among public, private, academic, and civil society actors. Okay, but what's so important here is the acknowledgement that it was necessary to locate the agricultural economic activity within the social and environmental spheres. This was not just an academics exercise, and I need to underline that this was something that was consensual and bought into by a wide range of actors who then undertook activities. Okay, since that time, we then had a further workshop where we identified our own local knowledge and innovation system under the auspices of Nefertiti. We've done a lot of other work on Nefertiti, certification systems, smart agri hubs, various other things. Okay.
Okay.
So that's it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that there wasn't